Right, it's 3.00, so the recording has begun. So welcome back. Hopefully you took some, of the cakes and things home for your whānau because there was a fair bit out there. So please feel free to do that if it's still there at the end. Our next speaker, I'm delighted to introduce to you, is Richard Brown. And Richard's been in New Zealand for 3 years, he tells me. So he spent most of his life in Canada, growing up in Canada. I think he might have been mesmerised by New Zealand, and there possibly might have been a woman in there somewhere. And you've had a background in disability and injury insurance, and are now living in Auckland. But what I'm really interested in is you've got some case studies, and it refers to them about wellness plans using both traditional and unique rehab modalities. So we're excited to hear about this, so welcome on, and also want to just again acknowledge you for being a sponsor of this event. So thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Hopefully I'm not going to speak too loud, but can you hear me okay up there? I'm not screaming too far. Okay. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to present here today at the conference. There's a lot of interesting things that we heard this afternoon from Dr. Beaumont and Professor Harris about bad workplaces and good workplaces. And the two case studies I have, and we'll talk about a little bit later, are really good examples of that, and not necessarily a bad workplace, but what a good workplace can really do to help somebody. And so before I start, though, I will give you a little bit of information about AIA, who we are. You're probably wondering, what is an AIA? Never heard of that. So we'll start there, and then we'll get into some stats and as well as the case studies. I've been told I'll be given a 1-minute warning, so. When I practiced last night, it was just half an hour long, and my dog seemed really bored by the end of it. So I'll see if I can cut it short a little bit. So AIA Group is the largest life insurer in the world. And that is we're an Asia-Pacific country, or company based in Hong Kong. We use the market capitalization as our barometer for the size. So on June 30th, we were the largest. July 1st, we might not have been, but we're going to stick with June 30th because it sounds really good. But 18 markets in Asia-Pacific, China, Singapore, Thailand, you can see them all there. Cambodia is our latest. We've been in New Zealand since 1981, and Australia since 1972. So 32 million individual policies within the group, and 16 million group scheme members. So our number one area is called retail insurance, and our number two is what we call corporate solutions, where we provide cover to corporates, groups, union funds, and in Australia some super funds as well. So the interesting thing about this is that over $1 trillion US is insured by AIA globally. So we have a vision to become the world's preeminent insurer, and slowly getting there. But in New Zealand, we've also just this year become the number one insurer in terms of size with the acquisition of Sovereign on July 2nd. So we're just now getting into an integration phase with our partners over in, we're both located in Takapuna, so just down the road. But we're in Auckland, AIA and Sovereign, so it's a combined entity, 679,000. Sovereign was much bigger than AIA in New Zealand, so it's a really good acquisition for AIA. But for us, we've just grown 5 times overnight. Most of us are in Auckland, but we're also based, we have some people here in Wellington, some in Christchurch as well, 800 people altogether. And last year, up to June 30th, 2018, $454 million in claims paid. And 45 million of that was in disability. So of course we offer life insurance, we offer trauma or critical illness insurance, as well as medical. But disability is definitely an area that we like to specialize in, and it's such a complex area, as you well know, that it's really important that we work well with providers and clients. So most of our clients in New Zealand are individuals. We do have some groups, but for the most part, our retail book is the biggest. So in terms of how we do things at at AIA is we try to do the right thing in the right way with the right people. That's our overriding philosophy, and it's something in claims that is really, really important. Insurers, for good or for bad, have a reputation of, trying to get people off claim, which is not necessarily the case. We do try to provide as much support as we can to help people be successful and return to work. And so some of those rehab modalities can be very traditional. Sometimes we have to think outside the box, but trying to do things in the right way to help. In terms of our claims philosophy and approach, we take a proactive and outcome-focused case management model. So what that means is that we start with the injury or illness, we see it as a diagnosis, but also see where can we help move this forward to help somebody return to work, knowing that good work is healthy for people. And the earlier that we can do it, the better. So early intervention is a real critical focus for us, and there are a number of ways that we can do that. But really it's a partnership between our clients, their employer, if it's a corporate group, their treatment providers, to create the best strategy for each claim. And we may do a number of different modalities in terms of rehab, which is counseling, mindfulness, support in changing careers if necessary. For insurance and disability insurance specifically, own occupation is the definition. So if they can't do their own occupation, we look for alternates. But number one, we want to try to help somebody get back to their previous job. And if not, then we'll help them with a change in career. A lot of our clients are also business owners, and sometimes business coaching needs to come into effect. Maybe they've lost their business over time, or they're not able to do it. It's a builder and it's a physical job and they can't do it anymore. What else can they do, and how can they do that? So you have to be a bit creative sometimes. Sometimes you need to start with just getting them out of the house, and sometimes you need to move them in through counseling and other modalities as well. So just so we get a picture of where we see our claims, number one category is musculoskeletal. Mental health is number two, and then cardiovascular and other, which is pretty much all the other ICD-9 codes, or 10 codes you can see. Mental health is growing. I'm surprised it's only 12%. I see it on every claim. But even though you see the number one diagnosis is cancer or pain or bad back, there's often mental health behind that. And you guys know that as much as anybody, but we really see it a lot in our claims. And when there is a bad work environment, it adds that much more complexity to the claim. And when we can remove that or improve that, it really can help. So first case study is non-medical barriers extend recovery. And, we talked about biopsychosocial factors. We talk about, the number one driver of claims being musculoskeletal, but usually there's something else going behind the scenes, like a family issue. Maybe the business has been failing. Maybe there were some workplace issues. Maybe there were other factors coming into play. And so we'll talk about that here in this example. 55-year-old manager named John, diagnosed with gastrointestinal cancer in 2015. It was early detected, so it wasn't terminal. It was going to be something where he needed surgery, chemotherapy, and expected return to work within 6 months. Recovered well from his treatments, but return to work was delayed. Last night, this slide wasn't working very well, and I actually planned on having something in the middle there first. And the timing didn't work for whatever reason, but I thought it was actually pretty good because in the middle, something else happened, where his employment was terminated within a few months. And this is something that's fairly new to me, being from a different country, but the medical retirement is very common in New Zealand and impacts, of course, someone's experience on claim, but also a number of different areas within the country. And that's something I want to talk about a little bit later. But we had a occupational physician see him, and he said, he has been cleared by a specialist. He is ready to engage in a return to work plan, and that's going to have to start with an increase in stamina and tolerance. But there was a lot of other things going on behind the scenes. So the initial attempt to reconnect him to his previous workplace failed. We weren't able to engage that employer. That's our first try, but they just decided to move on and hired somebody else while he was away. Not uncommon. Pain, anxiety, and side effects of medication preventing him from progressing. So it was pain-focused, right? There was a lot of secondary issues going on in this particular one. And that's not unusual for cancer. You know, you're going to go through a period of fatigue. There's going to be some residual effects and maybe some pain. But the thing is about cancer claims, in my experience anyway, is that these people are usually the most motivated, and they're usually the most keen to get back to their work style that they were enjoying before the cancer struck. It's almost like they want to, well, it is that they want to beat that disease and they want to get back. In this case, it was quite different because he was very resistant to any kind of rehab that we were trying to provide. But we ended up getting an exercise physiologist involved. He liked to swim, so we ended up structuring that a little bit more, a daily routine, walking, lightweight training. This exercise physiologist actually takes a mental health perspective to her work, and saying mental health and exercise is very, of course, closely linked. And we want to make sure that we're providing at least getting people out of the house first, getting them exercise, get their heart rate up, and get them out and about in the community as well. So we enjoyed swimming. That was a real key because we knew that that would be something that he would be keen to do, whether or not we talked about work. When we weren't talking about work when we started, because as soon as that came up, he got very anxious. Now you can understand why. He's 55 years old. He's not work connected. He's not going to, if his insurance ends, he's not going to be able to provide for his family. These are the things going through his head, right? Of course, he doesn't have a routine. He doesn't have those connections. He doesn't have, that purpose to get up in the morning, go to work. He was taking care of his kids and he was enjoying that, but that was his focus. His work, we call this the disability mindset. Your mindset becomes becoming disabled and staying disabled because everything else outside of that is scary. So this is not unusual. And we see this all the time in claims, and it drives a lot of the costs for claims, but also the costs for our clients who end up having to pay the premiums to support that. So what we try to do is making sure that we're providing that service and help. And that's the service offering that we also put into we're trying to market that more and more, that, ACC will handle your injury, but the illnesses are not covered. What are you going to do then? This is a great example of that. So we ended up getting a vocational consultant to assist in identifying alternate occupations. And he actually had a good IT background. He has some very good transferable skills. And he ended up finding a job. And it was a better paying job than the one he had before, which is a great news story. But before that, we had to have some very difficult conversations with him to say, you're well, you can move on, and you're not disabled. And that's a tough conversation to have, but that's often left to us to have. Physicians don't like to have that conversation. Some really good ones do, and we try to find those ones. But others seem to think that it's, the insurance will just take care of them and just, move on to the next person. Which is not obviously the best thing for him, because he could have stayed on claim for another 20 years, potentially. So the outcome was very, very good. It was funny, just before we had those, while we were having those conversations, that pain and secondary condition came up. So we had leg pain, he had wrist pain. None of it was due to his cancer. The cancer was clear. There's still some fatigue, but we're taking care of that in terms of helping him gain his stamina. And then in February, rehab concluded in October, and in February he returned to work. So it's a good news story. It took us a while to get there. In total, we're looking at 2.5 years. So it was a 6-month recovery, 2.5-year claim. All because of that workplace, in my opinion anyway. And hindsight's 20/20 on these things, but in claims you can often see a trend. And this is not unusual for us to see that. As soon as that employment relationship ends, that's it. For good or for bad. The second one is a really interesting one because it's almost the opposite. It's a mental health case. Mental health, as I said, is growing in New Zealand. It's more awareness out there, which is a good thing. with mental health, often you'll see workplace issues involved. And that becomes a question of chicken or the egg. Are they having problems at work because they have a mental health or a mental illness? Or are they having a mental health issue because of what's going on at work? You don't always know, and you can't piece them out. But this one was actually the opposite happened. Julie was a 35-year-old female admin clerk working for a large national employer, 40 hours a week. Long-standing mental health, first diagnosed 10 years ago, so it was bipolar disorder. So she had been getting treatment, she'd been getting the good, I think mostly through the DHB. They were providing her with some pretty good support. But then she had a suicide attempt. She went downhill, she stopped taking her medication, and she went into a trough. And it wasn't the first time that she had done this. Medication changes. She was in the hospital for a few weeks, I think. Ongoing counseling was to be set up by the DHB, but they just didn't have the resources, so that was going to be a barrier. And while she was in hospital, she was diagnosed as borderline personality disorder. So on the surface of this claim, you're seeing this, and I've seen many claims like this before. This is going to be a full-term client. This is going to go on for the maximum benefit period. You have a serious mental illness issue, and you have a borderline personality issue. Usually with borderline personality, you're going to see workplace issues. It's just building up. But the employer had actually tried to accommodate her on her own, and they initiated the claim because usually there's a 3 to 6 month waiting period for corporate groups. But they called us within a month, and they said, we're trying to accommodate her, but we don't know what to do. She was working from home 6 to 13 hours per week, unstructured, so she was just kind of doing bits and bobs, whatever they had for her. Need to know the details of expected absence from workforce planning. Of course, when you're a manager in an office, you need to know where your workplace people are going to be and what your budget is and how are you going to get the work done. Didn't know how long the mental accommodation is practicable. This particular employer doesn't hesitate to medically retire people, so we know that that was going to be on the table at some point. And then, but the really good thing about it was that she had a very good relationship with her manager. And this guy was really committed to helping her. So just going through that questionnaire that we had earlier, that tool, she would have scored high on that support at work. And that is such a critical piece to how people can be successful. It looked originally like this was going to be a long-term claim, and that can go on for, in this particular case, the policy is only 2 years long, but in some policies goes to age 65. This had age 65 written all over it. But because of that employer relationship, that changed everything on this claim. And that rehab plan was, we had an OT who was very well trained in mental health. This person had it's very unusual to find an OT out there who can actually not only specialize in mental health, but recognize the need for a psychological demands work analysis. And that's more and more has to be, I think, really done out there for white-collar jobs. We're seeing less and less blue-collar out there. We're very good at developing physical demands analysis, but not very good at mental health and understanding the mental capabilities that people need to have in order to complete their job duties. This OT understood that and was able to analyze her job and break it down, and then identify things that she could do, and then identify things that she's going to have to move forward and get support with. We were able to get some private psychologists involved because the DHB was just struggling to provide her with that service. And then structured return to work plan with talking to her specialist and treating physician, GP. And as you guys, everyone in this room probably knows, those silos exist out there where the treatment providers don't talk. That's where we really need to come in and make sure that they're all around the same table and working towards the same goal. I'm getting 1 minute left. But structured return to work plan was specialist. 8-week return to work plan was originally scheduled, extended by 3 months. And that's not unusual. That's not bad, actually. It's not an unusual thing for any return to work plan to get extended. So in wrapping up, she actually returned to full duties in October. It's a phenomenal result. There's a lot of things here, a lot of psychosocial barriers or biopsychosocial factors that would have really extended this claim. But because of that employer's commitment to helping her, it really, really helped that person regain her functional abilities and maintaining those working relationships. So just to finish off, you know, for employers especially, accommodate, find ways to help people stay at work. It's really, really important. And then developing those healthy workplaces, both physically and psychologically. There's a lot of work happening in Canada in the past 10 years about psychological health and safety in the workplace. And it's a fairly high standard, but if you're interested, go into the Canadian Standards Association. It's called Psychological Health and Safety. It's a tough standard to meet, and I think there are a lot of employers in Canada trying it and struggling, but definitely a worthwhile cause. That really helps. Partnership leads to success from initial notification to post-return to work. For physicians, we are a partner, and you are a partner, and we value your input, and it's important that we all get around the table and we talk about how we can help each other. And too often we're not talking, and that really doesn't lead anyone to success. So we need to all work together and work on a common cause to help people get back to work. Early intervention is key, and I think Dr. Beaumont mentioned earlier, we'd like to be in the office with you when they first see this person before you take them off work, because sometimes that's the trigger that leads to years of suffering for a lot of people, and it doesn't need to happen. So hopefully that was helpful, and a little insight into what we deal with in an insurance company, and that we're here to help, and we want to work with all of those partners to help our mutual clients get back to work. Thank you.
Right, we could take one question if there was one, or we can save it. Oh, yep, there, Christine.
Yeah, you know, that's an interesting question because there's a lot of work being done on predictive analytics. So basically you're taking taking some data, previous claim history, and identifying those factors that go into it. So it's diagnosis usually that's driving it. But there's a lot of work going on with artificial intelligence to find out what kind of big data is out there, such as economic status of that area or the treatment that is available. So that's kind of cutting edge, what's happening out there. The traditional tools that we use are basically you calling up the client and you're talking to them. And you're trying to understand not only the biological factors, medical factors, but also getting into the family support and work support and finding out you know, what their goals are. And really for me, it's about trying to get away from the medical and focus on what's the perception of that person and what's their own perception of where they're heading. And once you get to that, that's really where you can identify, okay, there's some things here that we need to do to get them going. Yep, we've tried that in the past. You know, there's different tools out there like that. I think for me, in my experience anyway, the experience of the case manager is really, really important because you can hear it in people's voice, right? You can see it in the clinical notes, and the scores will give you an indication. But I think you know, a lot of this is art, you know, and understanding people. Yeah.
Great. We'll hold questions. So thank you, Richard.
Great. Thank you. I think so. Okay.
So I would like to welcome to the stage Marianne Street and Todd Volster from, so many of you, and Marianne, you probably need no introduction. You know, you've had a huge portfolio and background as a minister. You're highly regarded, highly experienced. You've got such an amazing background that covers philosophy, English, industrial relations. You're now at Kiwi Rail, and I'm very, very excited to learn about this high performance, high engagement. Todd, you're going to go first, and you've had a really strong career in the Rail and Maritime Transport Union and its various guises, I'm sure. And what you bring to this is, what the two of you, is the absolute epitome of the workplace parties working together. So I'm very delighted to hear about it. I'll welcome you first, and then you two can do that, and we can take some questions at the end.
Excellent. So, yeah, we all have a story. I spent my first 18 years driving trains, and after that left the rail business and moved on into the union business. And the last 16 years I've been tied up with the Rail and Maritime Transport Union. So they say know your audience, so while we're getting set up, probably the best thing to do would be how many union members have we got in this room, or association members have we got in this room? Pretty good. Not too bad. Okay. So I'm going to start off talking a little bit about the RMTU, just to let you know where we fit into things, and then actually describe good work. Because at this stage we have got good work. We've been in places where we haven't had good work. I can go back 20 years ago when our workers were being killed at work. And that. So many of our workers were killed at work, where alcohol was not really monitored. Alcohol and drugs were just, there was plenty of alcoholics that we had in rail in those days, including the bosses having fridges in their offices and all that kind of thing. But the world changed. There was too many workers being killed, and so we had a ministerial inquiry into health and safety, and from there, really, that's where things turned around. So our little union, I suppose you could call it a Jack Russell. Our power to weight ratio is pretty good, but we are small. We were formed out of the amalgamation of two rail unions and a port union in 95, 1st of May 1995. We call ourselves the largest specialist transport union in New Zealand. We're actually going against the trend, and we are growing, so we're getting bigger. Half of our members are tied up with Kiwi Rail. It used to be 75%, but you can see those other ones, the French operators in both Wellington and Auckland, about a quarter of our members are there. And then we've got another quarter spread over all of the 11 ports. So our members do have good work. They don't need to have multiple jobs. Some of them are very, very well paid. They have benefits. We still have a thing called penal rates, believe it or not. They get double time on Sundays. We have medical retirement clauses. We have a whole lot of good stuff, which I'm going to go through one by one. And it certainly isn't everything, but it gives you a bit of a snapshot of what it's like to be an RMTU member working at Kiwi Rail. So gave this one a bit of a go with this word cloud thing, where you sort of chuck it all together and see how it works. So this is my first one. I think it sort of looks okay. Marianne's going to talk more about HPHE in particular, but yeah, I'm just going to go through some of the things that we've got. We've got a rail industry union, so you can see with Kiwi Rail and the Transdevs that we're spread straight all the way across it in that. So we like to see ourselves as the rail industry union, and if more players come involved, then we'll be there. We now have a just and fair culture. So rather than just a behaviour code or a discipline policy, we have a just and fair culture which was developed with the RMTU and Kiwi Rail together. We sat around the table and spent 18 months, 2 years putting it together and then reviewing it every year to make sure that it was still fit for purpose. And that's make sure that you look around the systems before you're looking at the behaviours. Most of the time an employer will go straight to the behaviours and say, naughty worker, you've made the mistake here, whereas we put a lot of effort in looking at the systems, and if the systems are wrong, getting our health and safety people to work with our members to actually improve the systems and not have the errors in the first place. We obviously have a collective agreement that we're very proud of, so the collective agreements in both of those French operators are very, very similar to what we've got in Kiwi Rail, because we've achieved things, which is a term which is called the same and more favourable. So if our work disappears, then we've got clauses within the collective agreement that make sure that people move over on the same more favourable. You'll note with all the problems that are happening in Wellington and in Auckland around the buses, they haven't been able to achieve the same or more favourable. So that means our workers take their leave with them, their service with them, all their entitlements with them, and basically just change the badge on their shirt. We really work hard on safe hours of work, and lately we're on a project which is the Fatigue Risk Management Group, which we're using Professor Gander. Some of you may be aware of Professor Gander from Massey, and we're doing it properly. We're doing a really good job of making sure that all the risk around fatigue is managed, and that's again a joint effort between the RMTU and KiwiRail. Most of the things that I'm talking about, if not all of the things that I'm talking about here, are contractual. So regardless of whether there's a new boss come along or a new HR, we keep it enduring. We keep it enduring as long as we can. I talked before about the issues with drugs and alcohol in the rail industry. It was a bit of a shocker. There was all the pubs were filled with railway workers, particularly around the railway station. We have a mature drug and alcohol policy that's been in place for 15 years, and it's been reviewed and updated, and the stats within KiwiRail of failed tests are excellent. So we have very, very good stats. We have better stats than Air New Zealand, that's had the likes of the random process in for a lot longer than us, but we do have random there. That helps to make sure that the people coming into the industry haven't got issues with drugs and alcohol, and we also have a rehabilitation approach if it's suitable. And where we work that out between the union and the company whether rehabilitation is appropriate. So that's really worked. 2003 we would have had about a third of the people fail tests for cannabis, and now it's very, very low figures, so that's worked, and it's something that we've done jointly. We have fair terms and conditions of employment, so coming into the work at KiwiRail, they pay for your training. You're not going to get a whole lot of debt like you would if you went to university. Sometimes the training can be up to $150,000 for a train driver to be trained to drive trains. And then while you're working there, you're getting your fair terms and conditions. And if you unfortunately need to be medically retired, there's also provisions for up to a year's wages plus your sick leave to help you out. The drivers have a sickness and accident, death and disability fund as well, that if they lose their driver's tickets, that they're treated fairly and they've got an opportunity to retrain for the future. We have NZ Staff Welfare, that's owned by the workers. They own holiday houses right throughout the country. They get compensation for doctor's visits, glasses, prescriptions. That's been going for many, many years, and it's going in good stead. We have employee participation agreement around health and safety. It's not a requirement by law, but we have that with KiwiRail. Obviously, a highly unionised workforce. We have worker representation. We have around about 300 delegates within the RMTU, so that's basically around 1 in 10. We have a relationship charter with KiwiRail and how we're going to treat each other, how there's going to be no surprises, and that's signed off by the CEO and the General Secretary of the union. Public ownership has been a big thing for us. Under private ownership, that's where things got really bad. Asset stripped the company, went to the share market, people ripped it off, and our workers started getting killed. Under public ownership, we've been in a lot safer place, and the jobs are better jobs, or good jobs. We have a consultative approach with KiwiRail and ourselves. That's contractual, consultation clauses within the collective agreement, but it's just business as usual. It's how we do things. That's once again the no surprises. You'll see in our logo, safety first, so we're a union that's focused on safety. It's not just about dollars in the pocket, so we have a dedicated health and safety organiser in our small little union. And that's our Karen, and we're very proud of our Karen, and that's all her role is around health and safety, dealing with the ports and the rail operators. We have a Just Say No card, which is when it gets to the point where a worker's being told to do something they don't feel safe about, they have a bit of a think about it, and then they contact us, and then they use the red card, which is a Just Say No card, which has been supported by the employer, including KiwiRail. We have hundreds of health and safety reps trained up to be able to do the job under the current legislation. We have health and safety action teams spread throughout the country that work on the outcomes of a just and fair culture investigation on how to improve safety. We have the injury management program, which is very relevant to what we were talking about, or what we were hearing about from the last speakers and some of the other speakers. So when ACC looked like it was going to be privatised in the late 90s, we got stuck in and put together this protocol around how workers are going to be treated if they're injured, and how to work out their return to work on medically suitable alternative duties. We don't call it light duties. So you have a really open mind. It has to be, it can't be demeaning tasks, and and they can train in that time as well, and the delegates are involved, the case managers, the managers and the employee, and we all have rights and responsibilities, and they're spelled out in a protocol which is contractual, and that's lasted for the last 20 years. It's been updated a few times, but that makes sure that the worker doesn't sit at home. We think after they've been at home for a month they probably won't come back, and that is the reality. But it's not just about injury. It is work, non-work injury. It is also health. So sleep apneas, things like that. It's reasons for people not to be doing their jobs. So very proud for people to actually look at our injury management program, our policy. Most unions do not like the partnership program and do not like the accredited employer set up with ACC, but we have got this protocol which actually provides some protections, and it's not all just about the employer getting a cheaper levy. We have industrial councils of democratically elected groups. We've got 4 of them within KiwiRail, and they cover most of the operation, not necessarily the offices, but all the operational parts of KiwiRail. They've been in place for 18 years, and that's another way of increased consultation between the employer. All of our workers are governed by a medical standard, so there's 4 categories of medical standard. That makes sure, well, it sort of helps to have good work because they're actually well when they have periodic medicals and get looked after. We believe our workers have a voice, and that's been increased with the HBHE project, which we're going to hear about shortly. Couple more. We have a whānau approach. People feel like they're in family when they're in KiwiRail. It's a KiwiRail family, and though KiwiRail has spent quite a bit on increasing communication, they have internal communication people, and they put a lot of stuff out. The CEO would put a video out every month of what's going on, and there's a lot of individuals in this world in now times. We like to think that that's really a good thing, that creates a good job, that people are watching your back. And when sometimes bad things happen, and I'll go down there and say, well, why didn't you intervene? Why didn't you look after your mate? He doesn't look well. He's set up to make a mistake. And that's the kind of thing that happens in KiwiRail and in the rail industry, and it's hopefully something that we keep fostering. So all of that, it just sounds like a whole lot of conditions and entitlements and stuff like that, but that's actually what makes good work for our people. You'll hear about some of the projects that you hear in the second part of this session. Where we're looking at people development, the whole life of a KiwiRail worker before they come on board and while they're there, and the ways that they can move around in the business. KiwiRail spent a lot of time trying to break the silos within the business, and that. So there's about 3 or 4 different main business groups, and one of their values is one winning team. We believe in KiwiRail's values. We've openly supported KiwiRail's values: straight and true, care and protect, one winning team, strive for success. They're all things that every employer should look at and think, well, maybe that KiwiRail's got it right. So I would encourage and be very, very happy to help anybody that wants to have a good look at KiwiRail and learn some lessons about from where they've been, which was really bad, to where they've got to and hopefully where they're going to get to in the future. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ngā kai whakahaere o tēnei hui, tēnā koutou, ngā manahiri nei, tēnā kōroa, Anne and Nona, ngā iwi katoa, tēnei te mihi nui ki a koutou, tēnā koutou, kia ora koutou katoa. It's my great pleasure to be here, and I believe I'm following straight on. Yes and no. Where's the beginning of mine, do you think? Oh, really? Okay. All right. The fact that this will bear close resemblance to the last presentation is entirely uncoincidental. You will notice that the slides are double-branded, KiwiRail and RMTU. And we do that as much as possible, particularly when we're talking about high performance, high engagement, which is a strategy across the organisation that I have been tasked with leading and developing and implementing. I'm going to flick through these slides because we are a little bit short of time, and I just want you to have something else to look at apart from me. And so what I might say might not relate immediately to what's on the screen, but what I will say will be the messages that I want you to take away. So the very first thing I want to say is that all of this boils down to respect. Respect. And I was listening closely to the previous contributors who were talking about things psychological, about mental health, about the way people respond and behave and are in the workplace. And I think if you treat people with respect, my experience is that you more or less get it back. And where you don't, you can work on that. So our historic position with the union was before my time. So it was combative. We had very low employee engagement. We had not a crack-hot safety performance record, and we refocused our themes. I'm going to talk about high performance, high engagement. So what is it? It's a mindset. It is not Management 101. I used to teach that, God help me, for 9 years at Auckland University. But my best lessons were on industrial relations, not on Management 101. So mostly people learned about industrial relations from me in their compulsory management studies course if they were doing a BCom, poor little buggers. Anyway, they've survived to tell the story, most of them. It is about trust building. It's about leaders letting go of their responsibilities. Often leaders in our organisation felt that they had an obligation to come up with all the answers. They had to be the fix-it people because, after all, they were being paid more. So surely that went with the job that they had to provide all the answers. No. What has begun to work under high performance, high engagement is consultation with frontline workers who contribute to the answers, the solutions to business challenges. Business challenges might be injuries. It might be productivity. It might be our bottom line financially. So do the frontline workers have an interest in those issues? They sure do. Todd talked about the whānau approach. We have got intergenerational railway workers in Kiwi Rail. My father and his father before him, and my mother and her mother before her. And they have an interest in Kiwi Rail being successful. So this works for business, it works for safety, and it works for individuals. One of the important things, however, is that both the leaders in the organisation, our managers, if you like, and workers' rights and the role of the union are retained. So there is no damage done. Nobody has to compromise. So in the middle of this is high performance, high engagement. And it has all of those outcomes, but it requires leadership. It requires a culture change. It requires ongoing engagement. We have abandoned, oh God help me, we have abandoned, I hope, that consultation process where a manager says, this is how we're going to restructure and I'd like to consult with the union about my foregone conclusion. We've given that up. If we have a business challenge, the whole purpose of HPHE is to go to the frontline workers first. We are highly unionised. 75, 76% unionised. Why would you not capitalise on that? Why would you not use that to everybody's advantage? I'm just going to rip through these. So we came up with, these are some of our silos, rolling stock, network services and operations. And we came up, in the last 3 years, we've been working on half a dozen major high-performance, high-engagement projects. Interestingly enough, look at the workforce development line. The union wanted workforce development, career progression, training, a sense of going somewhere. Why would we not do that? We wanted service standardisation. We wanted to improve network access on the track. for our workers so they could work safely and didn't have to clear out every couple of hours for a train to come through. We wanted to maximise and optimise the usage of our rolling stock, our trains. There's no conflict here. The ones on the bottom line were initiated by management. The ones on the top line were initiated largely by the union. And we've taken them all up. The fatigue risk management one that Todd referred to earlier, that came out of bargaining negotiations and resulted in a joint HPHE project. So what are the outcomes? They're all positive. It doesn't matter what Super Sundays are, really doesn't. But if you see that there aren't trains running on a Sunday, that'll be one of the reasons. Applying high performance, high engagement to daily work. We had an issue with a welder in the South Island who burned himself badly. Welding over his head, a bit of, what is that called, that liquid stuff? Anyway, the molten metal that he was welding came down his arm. He was wearing terrible clothes, really our old PPE, and he was badly burned. We went right around the country, consulted with everybody who was involved in welding activity. We won an award. The RMTU and KiwiRail won a WorkSafe award for that project. We've now trained 400 welders. We use problem-solving methods to resolve disputes, to introduce new technology, Arataki 2, doesn't matter what that is, doesn't matter, it's new technology. But it was the process that was important. And introducing rules for safety, engage with people. What do you need? What's going to work? Do you need a button on your shirt that you can hit and it triggers an alarm? What do you need? What do you need? What's going to be best out there for you? This isn't a management decision. I'll tell you the other thing that's really good about worker participation is that it doesn't get overturned. It doesn't get overturned later. It doesn't get ignored because management have come down and said, oh, we're going to do this. And they say, oh, for God's sake, why are we doing that? Oh, never mind, all right, we'll do. When he's not looking, we won't do it. We don't get that because they have participated, we've heard what the real answers need to be, and people buy into it. So it's made a difference. Oh, here's the bit about winning the award. 45% reduction in injuries since 2016. Our engagement score, +1 doesn't look like a lot, but when you're coming from -21, it's a crack hot result, actually. Huge participation in the engagement survey, up to 81%. We've reduced hours on locomotive maintenance. We've improved our financial bottom line. We've improved our passenger increases and their satisfaction. What we're going to do next is move into the next stage of HPHE. The reason I put this one up is for you to have a look at the building blocks at the bottom. This is all the stuff that Todd mentioned, so I don't need to go over it. Building blocks at the bottom. Joint KiwiRail RMTU governance of the process. Just and fair culture, jointly organised, jointly delivered. Karen and I deliver that course 4 or 5 times every year to managers and delegates. The values, our HPHE protocols, people being trained in it, the relationship charter and so on. These are things that are hammered out over time and are the basis for, I think, work that not only safe work, but work that is good for people because they are respected. Their views are valued. They contribute. They can see when they have contributed and made the place better, safer, more productive. They get it. They get it in a heartbeat once they are engaged. It's about respect, in my view. Thank you. Thank you. Todd's just reminded me, and here's the feedback. You can try to work out which ones of those comments on HPHE came from managers and which came from delegates. I can't tell you now. I can't tell you.
But don't go running away. We're going to bring all the speakers back up onto the stage and we're going to do a panel discussion with them. So as I said before, we've got plenty of opportunity for questions. But thank you both for that. That was fascinating. I've got 20 questions that I'm going to ask you afterwards about, what's interest-based problem solving. I want to know how that happens and the whole shared workplace leadership and learning how you achieve that. But thank you. That was really, really interesting. So speakers, come back up. What we'll do is we'll just take questions from the floor. If you want to indicate who you'd like to refer the question to, we can do it. Otherwise, we can just get a general, each one can say a little bit and come up here. So thinking up your questions, who's got their hand up first with one task? Right up the back row. So we'll just grab a few seconds for everyone to get up here. And then loud voice from the back. Other questions? Got now some roving mics. Yep, Suzanne.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your very strong and passionate presentation and informative. Surely your passion is infectious. So I'm wondering if you've seen your interventions, your approach, perhaps influence your service providers or your business partners? Have they come to you asking how you've done it? Can we copy what you've done? Can you help us?
Thank you for the question. The short answer is yes, absolutely. Sometimes they're a bit taken aback that we say, well, we would like to talk about this with the union first. And if they come from a non-unionised environment, they're a bit puzzled by that. And I said, I just need to say, you get more durable answers. I don't even have to go into a big spiel about it, but I just say, you get more durable answers this way, and this is the way we do it here. So it's trying to get this whole business imprinted as the culture in KiwiRail. And we are increasingly being asked by others to come and talk about how that's done in forums like this, industry-based forums like this, but also specific employers.
Yeah, an example would be at Centreport. We were introducing Just and Fair culture at Centreport. We were given the example that it's working really well at KiwiRail, so they showed some interest. We've got our people to go across. Marianne's agreed to provide the KiwiRail stuff, which costs money.
Did today.
And so that's somebody that works closely with KiwiRail, the port and the rail company, but they're actually showing off that this is good. This is being a good employer or providing good jobs. And we've had people going out to the Hutt Railway workshops where this has really started, where it was modelled, and the NZ Post is looking at it. We've also looked at Air New Zealand, how they go about it, doing it. So it is sort of a New Zealand and egg thing. It's not just a KiwiRail thing. So get on board.
Correct.
Yeah, thanks. People would say it would never happen in the rail industry. If that were an example of an industry where you've got to. So I've got a question for Anne, I think. Will it ever happen in the health industry?
That's a very good question, and I'm afraid I can't answer it because the problem with the NHS is that I don't think the unions talk as well to the managers, or perhaps the managers don't listen. So I really don't think it would happen in the health service in the UK, but that's my personal opinion. My colleagues back home might disagree with me because I don't work in the NHS. But when I did work in the NHS, the hospital I worked in, the general consensus amongst my colleagues where you could collapse on the floor and the problem would be removing your body. And it, certainly now with aggression from patients and users, it's not a nice place to work, I don't think.
Just one example in the health sector, because we have used a particular company to provide external facilitation of our HPHE stuff, and that helps build trust. So it's not HPHE owned by the company or owned by the union. We've got external facilitators. These external facilitators were instrumental in turning around Kaiser Permanente in the United States. So that is an example now of a highly unionised health sector in the United States, in brackets of all places, but a highly unionised health sector, and the expansion of Kaiser Permanente across the states on the basis of taking their union principles and their union organisation with them has been hugely successful. So there's one example overseas.
Over there we have some.
Geraint, I think the answer is no, not in our lifetime. So what was different in the UK was that the government commissioned a review of the health of the NHS, rather the health of the NHS personnel. And one of our colleagues in the UK, an occupational physician, Steve Borman, conducted a review, which is now at least a dozen years old. I've heard that he's been asked to do Borman 2 review. And what he found was that the health of healthcare workers is appalling, and the way that healthcare workers were being treated in the NHS in the UK was appalling. I approached a government department linked to the Department of Health, something to do with workforce, and suggested that they might want to do the equivalent here in New Zealand, and they said, we don't want to open that can of worms.
Now, my apologies, but Eileen's got
Can I just add something to that? Steve Borman has now been made the chair of something called the Council for Work and Health, and I think that demonstrates the prestige that he's actually held in. I do hope things will improve in the NHS because it's hemorrhaging good staff, and at the end of the day, I depend on it.
Eileen.
Yes, good question, Eileen. I was very pleased to hear you saying about initiatives from the DHBs, and maybe there was a bit of hyperbole in my response to Geraint, and we do have people like Janice Regan impacting on health in Waitemata DHB, and there are some champions out there who are really working very hard to make a difference. I think redundancy is an area that is traditionally done very badly. I think some employers do try very hard as part of the process to help signpost their employees as to how to move forward. Brian was made redundant. I'm not sure what came first, the redundancy or his health problems. And one of the things that I would draw attention to as an example of the difficulty of addressing redundancy is the difference in New Zealand between injury and illness. We're very, very good at managing injury-related absence in New Zealand. Probably the best in the world, I would hazard to say. We're rubbish at managing illness. I actually think we're worse than the UK at managing illness. And I've talked to a number of large organisations about their absence statistics, and they said, yeah, we're really good at managing injury absence, but to be honest, we don't actually know at any one point in time how many we've got off with illnesses. So until we actually start to manage illness-related absence, I think redundancy is kind of the next step on.
Down there, Peter's got the roving mic for you.
Yeah, other countries in the world do it a lot better. So if you have a look at our trucking industry and that, you know, there are owner drivers, There's no dependent contractor legislation. It's certainly getting looked at today. I think there was even something in the news this afternoon about the gig workforce and the Uber people and all those types of things, and actually, you know, lobbying to get the legislation to change to recognise the employment relationship instead of trying to avoid it. And that, so that's what would, you know, I'm a union person, so that's the way I would see it, is that, you know, we need the legislation to reflect what's happening out there in reality and get people looked after so that they are employees, and some of them are, you know, treated really, really poorly on the back of a company clipping the ticket and making money off them, and then they're having to do so much caregiving and so much of this other community stuff. So, yeah, that's the way I would see, is that we will work together very hard and lobby the hopefully worker-friendly government that we've got on at the moment, and get some changes, and camp out at Enley's Galloway's place until we get them. Yeah, perseverance can pay off. Yeah.
I think that's a good point to make, but I think also in any area where there are isolated workers working on their own, it is only going to be legislation and regulation that protects them.
So I'm very interested in the how we assess or figure out the psychological demands of a job. So I think that is probably one of the things that's a problem, or something that needs to be assessed in all areas. And I think some of the conversations we've had around just the healthcare sector, which can be so changeable, but it can be changeable on what you're dealing with day to day. And so for me in brain injury, one of our best days can be us dealing with a brain injured person that has really gone off, and we have done our best interdisciplinary teamwork on that day. But you come at the end of the day, you feel like you've been at the end of a hostage negotiation. You may have won, but you are exhausted. And I watch half of my team go down. They're ill. The more mature, at least like the psychologist will actually say, I'm going to take 3 days off. But so you see that. So it's what's happening on that end. But I guess on the other things, particularly in the healthcare sector, or any areas, but also you as an individual, if you're a mom with a baby that's been up screaming all night, the psychological demands of your work may be quite different that day. Or even if you're coming to work with a cold, and then some of us were talking out there during the break about the psychological demands of aging, when the expectations of you, either in a job as a physician or a nurse, because most of us in these fields are older, the ones that have stayed in these fields, but also the laborers. How do you keep a laborer at his job at 64 as opposed to 24? And but even with that psychological, I love that concept. I can't even figure out how we begin to assess it.
Yeah, the ones I've seen are actually quite interesting in talking to or listening to Professor Harris and her definition of what good work looks like, and it pays attention to a lot of that. How much conflict do you have? How much, are you going in and out of outside and inside? How many different tasks do you have that you may only do periodically, but you have to adapt to on a day-to-day basis? So it takes all of that into account, and I think it's really interesting. I think that's the next phase, and Canada's not that great at it either. And it was just coming in when I've left, and over here I've just seen it once. But I think it's something that we really do need to work on because of that new style of work. Right? We don't all have physical jobs anymore. Most of our jobs are sedentary and they're all cognitive. But especially when you come into psychological claims, usually it's concentration, it's fatigue, it's ability to handle conflict. That's the difficulty. And when you get into how do you help somebody return to work, you really do need to be precise. And you really do need to give that person a challenge, but you also don't want to stretch them out too much. And in the past, it's been very, we'll guess, right? At the end of the day, to see what's very difficult for it. But these, the psychological demands analysis really do break it down. Like for this particular person, I'm trying to remember on the case study, but she had to enter an invoice. That usually takes 10 minutes. And it was one system that she had to use, and it really broke it down into specific areas. And then she would have to have that signed off by a manager. And so she'd have to interact with that person. And maybe she can enter the invoice one week, and then the next week she's also interacting with the manager, so that she could actually build on those capabilities and those things that help people with, going through those difficulties. The worst thing is putting somebody. Banks are renowned for high psychological claims. We had a client in Canada who had 44% of their claims were for depression. And one of the issues was returning a bank teller to work and interacting with clients. They could do the tasks, but they couldn't do the interaction. And you didn't want someone breaking down in front of a client at a teller. So you had to be very specific in terms of those kind of demands. But yeah, I think that's really is the next step, to make sure that that's really built into everyone's job description, and talking about, being very clear in what your expectations are of that role. When you take on an employment contract and you're signing it, then you really understand what you're getting into. And then later on, when you're trying to help somebody return to work, it really does help.
It's probably putting my other hat on. In providing workplace rehab services, it's certainly, it's kind of the new face. I would say the last 5 years in Australia has been very much focused on psychological task analysis, because I think traditionally we do the physical stuff really well, right? We understand the task analysis, and we build that into our job dictionaries or suitable duties dictionaries, and we're able to look at those things and work out what somebody can and cannot do, and then we develop a return to work plan and off we go. But from a psychological perspective, I think it is the new face of where things are going, and certainly we're working a lot at the moment with Roads and Motorway organisation, and they've specifically asked us to conduct a task analysis, but with a focus on the psychological, because of the nature of the roles. So whether that be being exposed to abusive clientele, so certainly, I guess, resonating in terms of the sectors we're working in. So looking at the fatigue, memory, concentration, recall, and so certainly that seems to be the space and place. But I think stripping it back a bit, if we're doing the psychological task analysis for somebody with an injury or an illness, that then helps us develop the right plan to help them go back. So it should be looked through the same lens as we would with a physical, if you've got that right information. So both. So in the space I'm doing at the moment, it's to be utilised for pre-employment screening to see that the person is a match for the demands, the psychological demands of that role. You can use it post-injury to assess whether they can go back, or as part of the return to work planning. So it's a really, really useful tool if done right, and they are usually very detailed.
Everything.
One of the things I would suggest is that there is a risk assessment undertaken, and the people that do the job are consulted, which is what I thought was really interesting about your talk, that you look at what the job involves, look at the role demands, look at role ambiguity, think about being proactive. I didn't catch the full story because I left straight from our graduation ceremony to get my flight out here, but there was something in the UK press that the government was saying that good employers give out fruit, give loans for bicycles, and they offer counselling. Well, my argument is, don't offer counselling, stop the problem to start with. And that's part of the psychological risk assessment. And they've missed that link, that you can counsel till the cows come home, but if you're sending them back to the same dreadful workplace, they'll just go off sick again. And I really think that having an approach where you do risk assessments, where you think about how you can prevent the problem in the first place by looking at how managers react with their staff, having excellent industrial relations with your unions, which is what I thought was really interesting about your presentation. That's all part and parcel of reducing the psychological stresses.
The Canadian Standard for Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace is a really good resource if you want to check that out. Yeah. It's a free, well, it used to be a free download. It might cost you, but Guarding Minds at Work is another website. that has provided a lot of tools and resources for employers who are going through exactly the same thing. And just like the panel here was saying, it's really about teaching the employer how to create a healthy workplace for prevent psychological issues from happening. But also, as we all know, that you could it's not always a workplace, it's often biological or something else going on in their life. But how does the manager respond to that person who's going through that issue? And that's something that we were just chatting about today about our own workplace and how we're trying to make that better for our staff. So it's all challenging for everything, but yeah. Yeah.
The notion of employers retaining or dismissing employees, and that you talked about that, Richard. But just with the Kiwi Rail example, you didn't comment about staff retention or staff turnover. Has there been any change since your approaches?
It's different in different parts of New Zealand, but if you have a look at the Wellington terminal that we've got down there, the shunt yard, the turnover is just until we've got a 78-year-old down there that wears hubcap, the protective footwear, and running around in all weathers, operating a locomotive at 78 years old. We regularly have drivers with 50 years service. And that's in shift work, 24/7 shift work. So there isn't a lot of churn, but in some yards there is, like Auckland. Kiwi Rail struggles to actually pay them enough to actually live in that lovely place. So it does churn around and they leave. But most of our people are in there for the journey. Younger people seem to get a little bit intolerant and want to move on, and that's a real shame when they've just spent 6 figures worth of training on them and they just move on. But by and large, our people stay there until they're not medically suitable to be able to do it. So there isn't a lot of churn in Kiwi
Has
Rail.
that changed, or it's always been like that?
It's probably always been like that, but the project that started at the hut shops was a sinking lid, redundancies every Christmas, 10 years ago kind of thing. Every Christmas they'd be trying to shut the place down further and further. Now they're actually struggling to get people to come back and work there, and the place has turned around. And so they're having sort of open days for employment to go and work at the hut shops. And that is some of the problem, is because they cut down on apprentices and all that kind of stuff. We didn't have the post office to rely on and railways to rely on, and so we've got a really huge trade skill deficit, and Kiwi Rail's working hard on that one as well. But I don't think we had a big churn rate, and I couldn't really say that HE has changed that. But what I can say is that workers that had a whole lot of doom and gloom and no real future are standing there presenting to the board, to the senior executive team, and proudly presenting their work to the board. And to that was probably what made me turn. I was quite cynical about it because it's in my DNA. But then when I saw these people that have gone from doom and gloom to actually proudly presenting their ideas to the board, which is a mythical beast they'd never even seen before, I thought, yeah, we got there. We're there. Yeah.
I think one of the things that has happened in one of the workforce development projects, HPHE projects, is that while it was generated in the first instance by the union, it was very quickly identified as a key risk by managers, and that is the risk around workforce planning. Our demographics are pretty much as Todd has described them, and so what are we going to do? How are we going to bring people in, and how are we going to train them up? What we've decided is that despite the fact there is no compulsory retirement age in New Zealand, or perhaps because there's no compulsory retirement age in New Zealand, we've decided that when a worker in the mechanical area, which is working with very heavy kit and working with huge cranes, and it doesn't get much bigger than that, but when a worker turns 63, we will look to recruit somebody who in 2 or 3 or 4 years would be able to replace that person should they choose to retire. Because one fantastic example, we've got 2 signals technicians in Taumaranui. One's 65, the other's 68, or maybe older. If they both retire at the same time and we haven't got replacements, we are seriously stuck with signals control and repair on the North Island main trunk. And how do you get people to go to Taumaranui? Well, it's actually not that hard if you put the word out. And people have been coming forward and saying, oh, we've got a similar situation in New Plymouth. People have been coming forward and saying, oh, my parents are getting a bit old, my whānau is Maniatoto, we want to go back to Taumaranui. Didn't know we could change, can we change across? And we say, yeah, well, let's train you. If they haven't got that skill set, that particular skill set, let's train you and let's start now. So we're using 63 as a kind of trigger point. What do we need? What are we going to need in the next 5 years? Next 10 years? And that, I think that's a hugely positive thing. And we're training people across those silos. So they might have been a locomotive engineer, which is what we call them. They're train drivers to you, but they're locomotive engineers. And they decide they want to go and do something different. So how can we keep them? And we train them. And you said, you know, if you train them and then there's a whole lot of money spent on them and they go, it doesn't matter. Imagine if you didn't train them and they stayed.
So the second part of my question then is, you know, given Richard's comment about employers letting employees go, I mean, that is a problem. Do you have any solutions in terms of how to, obviously the role of the employer again is key, how can we help employers see the sort of the folly of their ways or the, you know, the impact that has on people becoming disabled and never returning to work, etc.?
I think it's going to have to be legislation, to be honest. In Canada, there's human rights based on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that we have to use as leverage to prevent that from happening, and that is you cannot discriminate based on disability, religion, sexual orientation, those kind of things. And there's some case law that says that employers have a duty to accommodate. So whenever you run into an issue with helping somebody get back to work, you have to pull that out. And HR will get it. Sometimes you have to call HR directly and say, this is your duty. But over here, it's quite different because there isn't that leverage. And often, I didn't mention it specifically, but I put in one of the key points is the employers often use, all over the place, not just here, but everywhere, disability as a reason to exit somebody. And the performance management is very difficult here. And it's difficult everywhere, but I think it's very difficult for an employer to actually performance manage appropriately, and I think that's leading to them using medical retirement as a way to do that. That's what we see. And so when you have an employer who has a real commitment to helping somebody like they did with that case, then it really makes a difference. But that was that manager. In other areas of that business, they don't do that. So it has to be either an employer who takes that on individually themselves, that we're going to commit to it, or it has to be legislation. And like Dr. Beaumont was saying, we're not very good at managing illness. We're very good at managing injury. There's legislation to back that up. So that's basically my view on it.
I think there's another word that comes into play here, and that's prognosis. And quite often I speak to employers and they say, hey, this guy's been off work for 6 months. We've written to his GP. We've got nothing that makes any sense back. We don't know if he's going to come back or under what circumstances he can get back. And I think I do a lot of work with the insurance companies, with Richard's company, and talk to the GPs, and they see the insurance companies as bad guys. They don't see them as partners. So we've got to look at more collaborative arrangements with the medically certifying doctors as well, so that they can give those prognoses and what needs to happen to help that person come back to work, which is actually what's in their best interest. I mean, those cases were great cases for a huge amount of effort going in and paying off. So it's worth doing. Yeah, sure.
I'm definitely open to that. And being someone new to the country, I don't know enough about the culture to really be able to speak to it. But, you know, we try to develop a plan that's going to work for that person and whatever that might look like. So I think I'd be really interested to find out more about what people have found helpful, especially for people from that culture. That would be something to really work on. But for anybody, you're asking about, you know, the non-traditional treatment modalities. Not talking about culture, but a friend of mine was a rehab consultant, and one of the things that he helped, one of the clients he was working with wouldn't leave the house, and he had very high levels of anxiety. So what they ended up doing was creating something that he was really interested in, which is sock puppets, and he liked to make these things. And so one of the missions was for him to go out and find the buttons and find the sewing material and get the socks. And that was how we got him out of the house. It wasn't about, you know, going to work. And you have to start from the very basic. And it could be singing, it could be meditation, it could be running, it could be whatever. For me, it could be Netflix, I don't know. But, you know, those are the things that you have to really find that individual's motivation and work towards it. But definitely. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's a good question. In Kiwi Rail, over the last few years, 3 or so years, we've been developing our Toi Toi program, which spots people in the business. Sometimes they've been union delegates, sometimes they've been middle managers who clearly have potential, and they are recommended to go on the Toi Toi leadership program. To begin with, this was for Māori only. The proportion of Māori workers in Kiwi Rail is huge. Unleashing that potential and that way of doing things is hugely beneficial to the company. For a long time, a previous colleague of mine, now deceased, Parakura Horomia, many years ago, opened or initiated the establishment in whatever Kiwi Rail was called in those days, Transrail, Te Kupenga Mahi, which was a support network working on Māori principles, but open to everybody, not just to Māori, but to everybody in the organisation if anybody needed some support. And that framework that has been there for a long time and been sort of ignored for a long time has come into its own, particularly with the application of the Toi Toi program. And we had a wonderful graduation ceremony of at a marae in Kawhia I think we had 40 or so in that intake. And sometimes they can take a year, sometimes they can take 2 years to go through it. They learn all kinds of skills, but mostly they learn about themselves and they learn to develop personal skills which may be useful for leadership purposes in the future. And it's becoming hugely important. And now we've got both in Stanley Street head office in Auckland and here in the railway station in Wellington, once a week, there's a little group. It's little in Wellington. It started off very little in Auckland. It is now about 30, of mostly Pākehā who are learning waiata because we are using that whole process and looking at things from the te ao Māori to reinforce the inclusiveness and the diversity of our workforce. And it's fantastic, and you just get in there and you learn some songs and people don't think they know them, and then they recognise the tunes, and then they learn some words, and next thing you know they're up standing at a pōwhiri supporting somebody with a waiata. So that has become a really important added dimension, I think, to our capability in KiwiRail.
I'd absolutely support that. Like what we've been introducing is an approach for tangata tiriti, that we are partners, that we are no longer waiting for tangata whenua to tell us what we need to do. We need to step forth and actually take a role together as partners and walk together from the start. And one of the things that we've jointly agreed that we'll do is have a joint annual plan, which one of the key initiatives which everyone and staff are really galvanised around is taking all our HR processes and weaving through like a rāranga the concepts of manaakitanga and whanaungatanga, and saying how do we look at those, how do we bring people into our organisation and welcome them and create an enduring sense of belonging. And to me that is good work, that is what you're doing there. So I think that's the sort, it's very fledgling, but it has had very positive responses from our staff. All right, have we got any further questions? Yes? Yep, still.
Yeah, actually, do you know what? I'm going to ask Suzanne to answer that question. And look, you've got a microphone. Suzanne is fantastic at convincing people to become signatories.
Speaker?
The signatory base goes across Australia and New Zealand, across the ditch, and the numbers has been growing for the last couple of years. We're very happy about that. The process is very simple. There's no cost involved. You simply pop into the link and the information will be on the RICP website. There's a little bit of information that you fill in. The application then goes to the college for approval. Well, yes, you can, but part of the process, I would hope, would be that you would engage with others in your organisation to bring them along in the journey itself, so that they don't get a surprise and they actually all agree to become a signatory, because it is a public commitment. You are signing up to the Health Benefits of Good Work consensus statement, which is a very wholesome document. It's a very comprehensive document, and it is all about good work, both for... Yes. Yes, I would recommend that that's a great way to go, and certainly we can help you with providing information readily so you don't have to go trawling through it all. So we have a lot of presentations that are already set up for you to present internally to your organisation, to your business partners, to your service providers, so that you try to bring everyone along with you on the journey. So once you become a signatory in Australia or New Zealand, for example, AIA is a signatory in both countries, then you become part of a signatory base. We call it, yes, a little bit of a family. And each of the signatory groups tries to provide resources, tries to assist the new signatories that come on board to get them up to speed with the evidence base behind the Health Benefits of Good Work campaign, the resources that are available. But probably one of the most powerful things that we offer is opportunities to collaborate, opportunities to share with other organisations so that the wheel isn't being recreated, information is shared, experiences, challenges, solutions are being shared. And we have a lot of forums and a lot of interaction across email and informal meetings. And the tool that Noni presented today, that's just one example of some sharing that we're putting together, and we're inviting organisations to be part of that so that we can, through de-identified data, give back to you to show you, what's out there. So that's in a nutshell. How about that, David?
Yeah, no, that was great. I would add one more word, and that is accountability. So you're actually giving a commitment, you're signing up to the principles of good work. And I think then that can, as well as holding senior management to account that they are actually delivering that, I think it also can be used as a tool to open up the conversations with your employees so that you're having the sort of discussions that are going on in Kiwi Rail, which are clearly very advanced in terms of what we hear of in a lot of organisations. But it's an evolving principle. And as I said right at the start, we've actually come a long way from that recognition that work is good for health to now this next phase, which is what is good work. And again, fantastic object lesson in what good work should look like. I think this was cutting edge. So let's get all employers having those discussions and taking it to the next level.
Quite simply, identify your decision makers and tailor your message.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And the answer 5 years ago was very little. There are a few isolated pockets where enthusiastic occupational physicians would go in and lecture to medical students. That is growing. In terms of GPs and their postgraduate training, as of about 3 years ago, a health and work module was introduced into GP training on a compulsory basis. And talking to the younger GPs, they absolutely get it. We are working very closely with the Royal New Zealand College of General Practitioners, and actually in terms of the makeup of the signatory steering group, we have a representative from the GPs College on the steering group, who is Richard Medlicott, who is their medical director. And we're looking at how we get the messaging to GPs about the health benefits of good work. But ACC latched onto this concept very early on, and we've got the Chief Medical Officer for ACC on the signatory steering group. Same with MSD, their Chief Medical Officer is also on the signatory steering group, and ACC have used the health benefits of good work on their medical certificates for many years now. So the word is getting out. I've got to say, Dame Carol Black talks about the difficulties that she's faced in the UK, bringing the GPs along with her, and that's been a long, hard journey for her that has caused her some angst. But we're chipping away at it, I think is the short answer.
All right, I think we're getting near the bewitching hour, so and conscious always of traffic and things like that. So thank you to our panel members. Let's give them a round of applause. You can go and grab your seats, and we'll just, so very quickly before you leave, I always think when you go to something like this, there's always at least one gem that you get from it, and then one action that you think, I'm going to do that. So why don't you just take 1 second, write that down on a piece of paper with your pen. What's your gem? And what's your action? Right, so my gem was actually the combination of the high performance, high engagement with the good work tool. I think the two of those are just going to be such a powerful thing together, and absolutely committed to trialling that, but also looking at ways to opportunities to engage my workforce where literacy might be an issue for some people, and I struggled to do the maths, so I'm sure that other people might in that. But really, really happy to use it as a trial site to explore that. So let's carry on this conversation. As we said before, and thank you for the question, it wasn't one put into the audience, but, become a signatory and equally do the survey. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time today to come. I'd like to really thank our organising committee. Peter's disappeared, but hopefully you can hear me from outside. To Suzanne, to everyone that's presented. To our sponsors, AIA, University of Otago, and to Fit for Work, thank you all. To our speakers, you did an amazing job, and you were very responsive to us and to our call, and also your generosity, huge generosity of spirit in sharing your stories and efforts with us today. David, you'd like to make a special thank you to our international primary guest. I do realise we have other international guests, to Anne, so I'll let you do that from down there.
Thank you, Denise. Yeah, just want to say I was in the UK for an occupational health conference in June, and Anne came up to me and said, I want to come and see your wonderful country. Can I come and share some of my knowledge? We've been working with Anne to make that work and enable her to come out here. She's working with Fit for Work over the next couple of weeks, and we'll be doing a presentation in Dunedin next week and Christchurch the week after that. So if you want further information about that, please let me know. We've got different events happening there. We're going to be talking about employee health and well-being. But on behalf of Fit for Work and on behalf of the Health Benefits of Good Work, just like to thank you very much, Anne, for coming all this way. Thank you. And I should just say, we're just going to wander down the road to get a drink afterwards. If anybody wants to join us, please feel free. Rob has suggested we might go down to Ridderford Street, where there's a bar there called The Office. So if you want an excuse to be a bit late, just say, sorry, darling, I'm just popping down to the office.
Thank you, David. Let's just end with the karakia. Kia tau ngā manakitanga a te mea nāro, ki runga ki tēnā au ua tātou. Kia mahia te hua mahihi ki hi, kia toi ko te kupu, kia toi ko te mana, kia toi ko te aroha, kia toi ko te ora. Ko ia rā e rongo, whakāria ake ki runga, tuturu whakamaue kia tina, ho mi huia taiki a. Let the blessings of the unseen past bestow upon each one of us, so that all evils pass us by, so that the permanence of the word, of the authority, the love and life remain. That is reason, O Ronga, to raise it on high, so that it has certainty and is maintained, and it will be secure. So travel safe, be well, and enjoy your evening, and please come and join us. Thank you for your time. Kia ora.